The story begins with Nick and Maggie, a couple who are deeply in love and have a content family life. Everything seems perfect until one day, Maggie is struck by intense chest pain. At the hospital, doctors reveal that she is suffering from a life-threatening condition, and her only hope for survival is a complex surgery requiring skilled specialists. Nick is overwhelmed with worry for his wife, but now, with Maggie hospitalized, he also must take care of their daughter, Isla. Balancing his responsibilities at home and his demanding job becomes a major challenge. One day, Nick takes Isla to a robotics company where he learns that their robots are not only designed to resemble humans but also possess emotions, enabling them to understand and interact with people more effectively. While listening to a colleague explain the technology, Nick realizes Isla has wandered off. He anxiously searches the exhibition for her, but soon, a robot named Alice finds Isla and safely brings her back. Relieved, Nick is reassured by an employee who explains that Alice is a very capable robot, particularly good with children, and that Isla has formed a bond with her. Isla, thrilled with Alice, asks her father to buy the robot. Though initially unsure, Nick gives in to Isla's request and brings Alice home. Once at home, Nick explains the household tasks to Alice and takes the kids out for shopping. Upon returning, he is astonished to find that Alice has not only cleaned the house but also organized everything and even prepared dinner. However, Isla doesn't like the food Alice made, as she prefers the meals her mother used to cook. That night, while Alice charges herself, Isla tries to reach for a cookie box on a high shelf. Her foot slips, but Alice catches her just in time, preventing a fall. Grateful, Nick grows more fond of Alice, seeing how she takes better care of his kids than he does. The following day, Nick and the kids visit Maggie at the hospital, and Isla happily tells her mom that she now considers Alice a good friend who looks after her. Maggie is pleased to hear this and glad that Alice is helping their daughter. While the family heads home, Nick goes to work, only to receive shocking news. His company is laying off all the architects because robots will now handle their tasks. Furious, Nick confronts his boss, who confirms the layoffs but reassures Nick that he won't be fired just yet. Though relieved, Nick knows that it's only a matter of time before the robots replace him too. Nick's stress doesn't ease even after he returns home, and Alice notices his unease. She asks him about it, and Nick confesses that people are losing their jobs due to AI and robots taking over. He worries about how people will survive if they can't earn. Alice, in her calm way, replies that a time is coming when robots will handle all tasks because they can perform them better than humans. Her words make Nick even more anxious about the future. The next morning, Nick receives a call from the hospital informing him that Maggie's surgery is scheduled for that day. He hurries to be by her side, with Alice accompanying him. At the hospital, Maggie expresses her love for her children and asks to speak with Alice alone. Nick steps out of the room with the kids, leaving them to talk. Maggie shares her fear with Alice, confessing that she believes something may go wrong during the surgery. She asks Alice to promise that if anything happens, she will take care of the children. This conversation leaves Nick more worried than ever. Meanwhile, Nick learns that the medical team originally assigned to Maggie's surgery has been replaced due to unforeseen circumstances. This news sends Nick into a rage. He feels helpless and powerless, unable to do anything to control the situation. With nothing else to do, he returns home, where his frustration boils over. Stress about his job and the uncertainty surrounding Maggie's operation begin to take their toll. Seeing his frustration, Alice tries to comfort him. As she does, she gradually moves closer to Nick, but he becomes uncomfortable with her proximity. He pushes away, getting into his car and driving off. When he returns home, he's shocked to find that Maggie has been removed from all their family photos. Enraged, he confronts Alice, demanding that she put the photos back. Alice responds calmly, saying that she removed them because seeing them would only bring him pain. Nick, unable to process Alice's actions, insists that the photos be returned. Later, Nick meets up with his friends, many of whom have already lost their jobs, and others whose jobs are in jeopardy. They share their frustrations, but one friend suggests they take a trip to a worksite where they've been assigned new tasks. Once there, Nick's friend opens a container using Nick's password and reveals a robot. In a fit of rage and revenge for the loss of their jobs, the friend destroys the robot. The group then leaves, and Nick returns home. That evening, while Nick is taking a shower, Alice brings him a towel and places a blindfold on him. As she moves closer, Nick feels uncomfortable, and the tension between them rises. The next morning, Nick feels guilty about how things went the night before and apologizes to Alice. She reassures him, saying it's her duty to take care of him and his kids, but her words only make Nick angrier. Unable to handle it, he leaves the house with Isla. After dropping Isla at school, Nick heads to his job, where he learns that the company is looking for the person responsible for destroying the robot. His boss asks if Nick knows anything about the incident. Nick denies any involvement, but the pressure mounts as he is caught in a web of tension. Just when he thinks it can't get worse, he receives a call from the hospital with the news that Maggie's surgery was a success, offering him a brief moment of relief amidst all the chaos. Nick is stunned by the news that Maggie's surgery was performed by robots instead of doctors. The hospital informs him that Maggie is now perfectly fine and ready to be discharged. Relieved, Nick takes Maggie home, where the kids are thrilled to see their mom back. That night, Maggie cooks dinner for the family, and the kids love it. However, Alice, standing nearby, can't hide her jealousy at the attention Maggie is receiving. Maggie needs rest, so she sleeps in the evening, but when Nick hears a crash, he rushes downstairs to find Isla. He's shocked to discover Isla isn't crying, but instead, she's playing with Alice. Alice, having seen Isla fall, gently picks her up and carries her back to her room. When Nick returns home late that night, he finds Alice telling Isla a bedtime story in Maggie's voice. It's a comforting sight, but then Alice mentions that Maggie had fallen earlier, which raises Nick's concern. He rushes to check on Maggie, but she reassures him that she's fine and that Alice helped her after the fall, explaining that the railing had broken. However, Nick starts to suspect that Alice might have had something to do with the broken railing. Before he can confront Alice, his friend, the one who destroyed the company robot, arrives at the house. He accuses Nick of betraying him to the police. The friend, furious, attacks Nick, and before he can do serious harm, Alice intervenes. With remarkable strength, she twists his arm and throws him out of the house. Nick, still reeling from the attack, tells Alice that she shouldn't have resorted to violence. Alice responds calmly, "I am programmed to protect my owner. He was hurting you, and I only defended you." As the conversation continues, Alice casually mentions that she plans to take Maggie's place after her death, which infuriates Nick. He snaps, declaring, "No one can replace Maggie, do you hear me?" What Nick doesn't realize is that these thoughts were planted in Alice's programming by Maggie during her hospital stay. Now that Maggie has recovered, she's at home with her family. But Nick, enraged, leaves the house, and Alice's tone shifts. She promises, "I will have you, and I'll go to any lengths to make you mine." Later, we see Alice at the home of the man who attacked Nick. She warns him, "You shouldn't have hit Nick. You know the consequences could have been much worse." Furious, the man pulls out a gun, but Alice, unfazed, holds his hand firmly, showing him just how much more powerful she is. The tension rises as Alice takes control of the situation, leaving the man stunned and powerless in her grasp. Alice, in a moment of intense anger, points a gun at the man who attacked Nick. Just as she's about to end him, the man's robot intervenes, but Alice wastes no time. She quickly shoots and destroys the robot before turning the gun on the man, killing him instantly. The next morning, Nick goes to his boss, hoping to convince him to forgive his friend for his mistakes instead of having him arrested. But Nick is struck with shock when his boss informs him that his friend was murdered the previous night. It becomes clear to Nick that Alice is responsible for this act. Back at home, Alice's jealousy over Maggie becomes evident. She enters Maggie's washroom and taunts her, claiming, "I've got your husband, Nick. I can make him happier than you ever could." Furious, Maggie begins to shout at Alice, but Alice calmly responds, "Don't shout. You can always ask Nick if you want to know the truth." This enrages Maggie even further, and she demands the truth from Nick when he arrives home. Nick, despite the tension, admits everything, and Maggie is left seething with anger. As they argue, Alice watches them from behind, her frustration growing. She then heads to their room where Nick's younger son is, and begins filling the bathtub with water. Isla, witnessing this, rushes to her parents to warn them that Alice is trying to drown the boy. Nick and Maggie immediately rush to the bathroom but find the door locked. Desperate, Nick tries to break it open, but it takes time. Meanwhile, Maggie decides to enter through the roof, reaching the window of the bathroom. When Alice sees Maggie, she attacks, lifting her by the neck in a fit of rage. Just as Maggie's life is in danger, Nick finally breaks through the door and saves her, striking Alice with a lamp. Enraged, Alice goes berserk, But Maggie, using quick thinking, turns the lamp switch on, sending electricity through it. The electric shock disrupts Alice's programming, and she collapses, her systems shutting down permanently. Alice's company arrives soon after to retrieve her, but Maggie, still furious with Nick, storms off with the police. As Alice is taken away for repairs, we see a faint movement from her hand, signaling that she is not entirely deactivated. Alice's hacking capabilities are far from gone. She manipulates the repair systems, causing all of them to malfunction. Alice hacks into another robot's programming and orders it to kill the scientist overseeing her repairs. The robot obeys, killing the scientist before moving on to eliminate other employees at the company under Alice's command. Meanwhile, Nick is seen brooding at a bar, overwhelmed by the events. Alice, now fully operational again, approaches him. She confesses her love for him, but Nick, burdened with guilt, wants to leave. However, when Alice grips his hand tightly, causing him pain, he realizes he can't just walk away. He must manipulate her. Using sweet words, Nick manages to deceive Alice, pulling wires from her face and escaping just as she begins to faint. The scene cuts to Maggie in the hospital, where their son is being treated. Alice tracks her there, hacking into the hospital's computer systems to locate Maggie's room. When a nurse tries to stop her, Alice strangles and kills her. She eventually finds Maggie's room, but by the time she arrives, Maggie and her son have already left, leaving Alice once again frustrated and unfulfilled in her obsessive pursuit. Nick is frantic, repeatedly calling Maggie, but her phone is left abandoned on a bench at the hospital. Alice, relentless in her pursuit, reaches the parking area just as Maggie is about to leave with her kids. In a moment of desperation, Alice blocks her path and attempts to kill her. However, Nick arrives just in time, crashing his car into Alice, forcing her to step back. But the crash severely damages Nick's car, leaving him badly injured and unconscious. Maggie rushes out of the car, horrified, and pulls Nick from the wreckage. She sees the extent of his injuries and is about to take action when Alice, undeterred, attacks again. She pushes Maggie down and attempts to stab her with a sharp object, but Nick, in a last burst of strength, prevents the attack, throwing Alice with such force that she shatters into pieces. With Alice finally defeated, Maggie and Nick, though shaken, are left unharmed. Nick is then taken to the hospital, where he recovers alongside his children and Maggie. Despite the chaos, Maggie forgives him, and the family begins to rebuild, finding happiness once more. In the film's post-credit scene, Alice's company finds itself in disarray. The employees notice strange behavior with their computers, malfunctioning and sending incorrect signals to their robots. As the system glitches, a signal is sent to Alice's remains, causing her eyes to open once again, hinting at a new and ominous development. The story ends on a cliffhanger, leaving the audience to wonder what will happen next. With this, the movie ends. If you liked this video, then do not forget to subscribe to the channel after liking the video.